Hi, this is Amy from Good Food Unearthed, and I'm joined today here with Pam, Dr. Pam Popper of Wellness Forum Health and Make Americans Free Again, which is contributing to the Ohio Stands Up landmark lawsuit. And I believe you're also involved with now a lawsuit, a similar lawsuit in New Mexico, and there's been filings against the federal government as well. Yeah.
Yeah. And we have two more states coming on.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we do. I can't tell you which ones they are, but we're going to file in two more states.
Oh,
Yay.
cool. So, what I want to talk with you about today is going to be a problem solution thing. So, we
Okay.
have this problem of medical tyranny, but from what you teach at Wellness Forum Health, it seems that this is not something that has happened overnight. So, I want to talk a bit about the history of this kind of step into medical tyranny, what brought us here today, and then solutions such as the business you set up and why
hmm
you have it, and what your focus is with teaching people how to take control of their own health.
hmm Yeah. So let's talk about medical tyranny.
Okay.
Medical tyranny is one issue. I think the other is medical incompetence
Yes.
and
Hmm.
medical malfeasance, which is another issue. They're closely related, by the way, because
Hmm.
it takes people who are disingenuous to do something like this in the medical field. But medical tyranny has been going on all over the world for a long time. Some places worse than others, but decades of this. And medical tyranny example would be you can't work in this hospital unless you get a flu shot. Another example would be you can't put your children in school unless they have these vaccines. In many places, psychiatrists can say to a parent, you either put your 5-year-old on Risperdal because he has a behavior problem, or we're calling Child Protective Services. And, we could go through the list, but it basically goes to using government to force people to do things that they otherwise wouldn't want to do concerning healthcare and that sort of thing. Okay.
Hmm.
Um, and there are other things, certain groups of people are favored to practice and all that kind of thing. So this has been going on for a long time. And for decades, I've been in this business 25 years. And for my entire career, I have been watching people who are incredibly well-intentioned, who have worked to try to get rid of the medical tyranny. Okay. And this is separate from what our business. I mean, we've gotten involved in some of it, but what have people done? Well, they send emails to their legislators, they sign declarations and petitions, they prepare educational packages with scientific information for politicians, right? They testify, arrange for expert testimony. Injured people, people injured by healthcare, whether it's opiates or vaccines or whatever, they're brought in to testify. And if you look around, I mean, this is the bad part about all this, it gets worse instead of better every year in spite of all those things. And the reason I say that is I think that in order to do something constructive about this, we have to make sure that we're not doing the same unconstructive things that have, and by the way, I'm not saying that the people who did this, there's anything wrong with them. They were well-intentioned people who wanted to make things better, right? Just using wrong strategies. Okay. So we have to learn from that and make sure we don't do the same things. So what we're experiencing right now worldwide is a big expression of medical tyranny. It's government using fear of a virus that isn't even a pandemic, it's a hoax, to control people. It's just a bigger version. And since they've been getting away with it for so long, I guess we shouldn't be so shocked that they decided to do it in a big way here. All right. So if we're going to solve the problem, we need a different toolbox to do it. Now, as it relates to our business, how that happened is how we got involved in this whole thing to the extent that we did is I started my company 25 years ago. And the basic premise of the company is the fact that most people, when they make decisions about diet, health, and medicine, they do it entirely differently than the way they make decisions about everything else. All right. So if you're going to go buy a car, you generally want to have some discussion with, you do some research, you go in, you talk to the people who sell the cars, you check out their claims, and then you make a decision. You do that with houses, you do it with appliances, you do it with retirement accounts. When I ask people, and I've been doing this for years, why are you taking this supplement? My cousin sells it. Why did you adopt this diet? My coworker lost 20 pounds doing it. Why did you agree to take this drug? My doctor said do it. Okay, but there's it's like people go completely brain dead when they get in a medical setting. So our business started 25 years ago to teach people how to buy healthcare related things, whether it's talking about the supplement you take or the surgery you're going to have, using the same decision-making process you use for everything else. And it's remarkably simple to teach. I mean, it's you think, why didn't somebody else think of this? Actually, it's remarkably simple to teach. And when people start making informed decisions, the outcomes are better. And also, it dries up a lot of what people do in healthcare. I mean, we could reduce the healthcare costs in our country by 2/3 if people would just think about this stuff and investigate before they said yes, right? So that's basically what we do here. And how I got interested in this whole COVID thing is it was expected, I think, because anything new in healthcare, I mean, a lot of our libraries, we have thousands of hours of educational programming. We own a school who trains health professionals. We have a library, extensive library of articles. So we have all the stuff that you would expect to cover that's kind of timeless. I mean, what causes a kidney stone? Not new information, but a lot of people don't know that, right? But when something new comes out, a new device, a new drug, a new procedure, whatever, screening test, people expect that I'm going to look into it, all right? So that's how this started. And I've always looked into it and created elaborate information for our clients and some free stuff for people who aren't clients and members. So I posted our first video back in March, and then that's how this all got started. But we're dealing with a consistent problem, which is medical incompetence and malfeasance combined with medical tyranny.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a big exploded version of it right now. And it affects all countries in differing ways, but essentially the same concept.
Yeah. Well,
Punishing people, but
yeah.
for no reason at all.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people they kind of believe they trust that their doctor is uh, giving them something with the best information or the best of intent, or that they've been educated in a way that they are taking into account this whole person's health. They know how to diagnose. They know what this drug is going to do. So I want to talk about you teach about what informed consent is, and you have a definition of it, but there's also this change overall in the medical community about what they think informed consent is. And I wonder if you could tell us about that.
Well, there's no real informed consent in medicine. It's not required right now.
Hmm.
So doctors issue instructions, and then that's basically informing you. And then if you have anything in writing, it's usually in advance of a surgical procedure, where you've got 3 pages of 4-point type that basically says, if you read it carefully, we can do anything we want to you once we put you under, you know. But what I think informed decision making is all about is again, let's go to the example of buying a house. Let's just take that for example. So if you're the realtor, and this goes to our relationship with our people, realtors don't tell you where to live. They help you navigate buying a house by teaching you to look at replacement cost and what do you have to do to this place to make it livable, making sure the place gets inspected, looking at comps on the street. I mean, we all have, when we're getting ready to make an investment, I mean, my house is a fairly large investment for me. And so before I signed I just didn't stand in the driveway and the realtor says, I picked this out for you. I'm the genius at real estate. You don't know anything. So, let me know when you want me to have your stuff delivered here. That would be insane, right? But that's the equivalent of what goes on. So essentially what we're talking about is teaching people to say to any health professional, assuming it's not an emergency. I mean, if my head's bleeding on the sidewalk, I think we better just fix that, right? But non-emergency situation, you're suggesting that I do X, Y, and Z. I'm going to be looking into it. If you have some published studies to give me, I'd like to see them. But I'm going to look into it, and then I'll get back to you and let you know what I've decided to do. Just like I remember when I signed the mortgage for my house, I probably ought to sleep on this and make sure I feel good about it in the morning. I remember when I signed the lease on this building, I said, I'm 99% sure I'm going to do it, but I think I just want to make sure I feel this way in the morning, because it was for $1 million for the first time, it's a lot of money. All right. So that's what you did. And I did this crazy thing called reading the lease before I signed it, and I actually like our landlord a lot, but every time we renew, I read the lease. So let's do that with healthcare. And people think it's complicated. Part of the reason is because doctors have told people this is stuff you can't understand, which is not true. And part of it's just nobody's ever shown somebody how to use some basic rules and principles to start looking at information so that you can figure out what's right and what's wrong.
Mm-hmm. And I know you teach, you have a research boot camp coming up, and you teach how to research. And I wonder if you could talk about one of I think one of the tips that I really like is what you tell about Karl Popper. Is
Hmm.
not a relation of yours, but one of the things he says that you can help discern, get to the truth of the matter.
Right. Well, I think the first thing is I don't want people to be cynical. I don't think that's an attractive trait, but I think you want to be skeptical. All right. So again, let's go back to the real estate thing. The realtor says this place is worth 490,000. Well, maybe it is and maybe it isn't, but I think before I sign the mortgage, I'll check it out. All right. So I don't think the realtor is a bad person. I just think it's a big decision, right? So Popper, the other Popper's philosophy was when you hear something new or you hear something that appears to contradict something that you think is right, assume it isn't. Okay, just assume it isn't. And then try to prove that it isn't. And if it survives that and turns out to be true, then you'll know you're really onto something. All right. And so again, that tends to be the way that people look at other major decisions. And again, if you apply it to this, you're going to be a lot more grounded. You're not going to be you won't be confused for one thing. All right. Because you hear people say this all the time. I'm just so confused. Everybody says something different. Well, learn how to not be confused. Again, you don't stand helpless in the driveway with the realtor and say, I'm just so confused. Somebody said this house isn't worth $490,000. Well, there are ways to figure it out. What did it cost to build? You can find that out. What are the comps on the street? You can find that out. What are the houses selling for? Right? You can find that out, right? What has to be done to it? Can you afford to do that? What are the taxes? I mean, there's nothing you can't find out if you apply yourself. And people routinely do it. You just need to teach them to do it with this. So Popper's idea, and that's what I do. When somebody says, what about this in healthcare? Assume it's wrong. Try to prove it wrong. If it turns out to be right, okay, now we're on to something.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think one of the things about the medical tyranny is how even if you're an informed person, say your child is in hospital for cancer, but you've researched complementary medicines and you've decided that maybe the best route for your child is not to go with chemotherapy or radiation. But then you, as a parent, could be threatened to have your child taken away from you or
Mm-hmm.
face court time because they would say that that's basically like child abuse. So you can't do that.
Right.
And the same with them. I think I talked to you one time and you mentioned how people on welfare, if they don't take their psychiatric medication, they will be denied that welfare.
Mm-hmm.
So we
Yeah.
have that overreach where even if you do make your own choice for what you decide is best for you, the government steps in and says, "Well, no, in fact, we override your choice."
Right. Exactly. And that should not be allowed to happen.
Hmm.
I mean, I think we all agree that there are egregious circumstances in which children have to be taken away from parents. Okay. Abuse, starvation, all kinds of things. Horrifying things that happen to kids that should never happen. However, parents, rational parents, should have medical authority over their children, and they know what's best for their children. And this we've been careening toward this for a long time, and it isn't just with health. Let the government do more and more, intrude more and more into our lives. Again, we sat back and watched and let this happen. I mean, to a certain extent, many of us have seen this coming and didn't do enough to stop it. And now I think the call to action is we have to stop it, or we're gonna live as slaves in communist countries. I mean, I live in the People's Republic of America right now, based on what's happened.
Hmm. Yeah. So I want to talk specifically about, so you wrote this book. I believe this was what, back in 2012 or around
Oh,
that time.
sometime around there, yeah.
Yeah. And in towards the end, you talk about a personal experience you had with the state coming after you when you
Mhm.
opened for practice. And I wonder if you could talk a bit about your experience about what happened to you, because it seems like what happened to you has happened many times before to other practitioners who offer an alternative outside of the controlled medical system.
Yeah. So I opened my business in 1996. I've never said I was a dietitian. I don't want to be a dietitian. I disagree. We employ dietitians here, but I disagree with dietetics as a philosophy. And I don't think that dietitians are very well trained in school. And the good dietitians will tell you that. Just like good doctors will say, I didn't learn how to do a lot of the stuff that I do that really matters in medical school. All right. So I opened in 1996, and it was very shortly after I opened that the Ohio Board of Dietetics started an investigation of me for practicing dietetics without a license, which I clearly was not doing. I ended up winning this case, by the way. But it escalated into it was a 5 or 6 year battle. It cost me $160,000 in 1996 money. Okay. And at a certain point in time, I think it became we're going to make an example out of her, because it got to be a pretty high profile case. So when I won it, that was not so good for them. But in the process of this whole thing happening, we found out that this little agency had investigated more people than all other states combined in the United States, and they'd taken action against more people than all other states combined. And so I decided that you had to do something about it, all right, because it was ridiculous. I mean, they essentially what this was they wanted a monopoly on the practice of nutrition. So I worked with a couple of legislators. I started getting involved in politics, and I worked with some legislators to draft legislation to take their power away. And we didn't get that bill passed, but we did get some changes in the language of the existing law that prohibited them from going after people like us. And then I worked on getting that language inserted into bills in some other states too. But I learned a lot through that experience. And I'll tell you one big thing that I learned that's really important. I spent an enormous amount of money and time. Most people don't have an enormous amount of money and time, all right? And that's how I got it done. But one of the things that I constantly got asked when I was working on this stuff, legislators would ask me, you, Pam, say that what you want here, what you're asking for, is for the reins to be loosened on who can talk about nutrition or health or medicine. Okay. And you say this is what people want. Well, where are the people who want it? Okay. So I managed to get things done in spite of not having a big group of people who want it. All right. But in 2008, what happened was the economy crashed in the United States. So I thought, well, this is a good time to take a break. Everybody's so preoccupied with that. I don't see us getting much done at the state level. And then in 2009, Forks Over Knives came along, and that became all consuming. And at a certain point in time, I said to myself, I will probably return to some kind of activism, but not in the same way. I will learn from what didn't work in the past, and then I will do something different the next time around. And thus, this time with Make Americans Free Again, I'm basically saying to people, this absolutely will not work with a handful of people at the top of an organization working their rear ends off and reporting to everybody. What has to happen is everybody has to get involved. You need to be reporting to me every week what you're doing in order for this to go forward and make a difference. So I learned from that experience, and it was productive. I learned a lot about how much government is a partner with medicine in all of its branches, and how insidious that is, and how it leads to terrible outcomes for people.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think what's where the lack of incentive for people coming up is many people don't realize, like, because information is so controlled, they don't realize the things that they aren't hearing until somebody brings it to their attention. So I wonder if we could talk about we have this vaccine coming out now, and a lot of people are being drawn into the attention of the misrepresentation of effectiveness and safety. But this is really nothing new for the medical industry. As far as I've learned, it seems to go back a long time for drugs, for procedures, for devices. So I wonder if you could talk a bit about that. Like it covers statins, stents, heart surgery, the opioids, psych drugs, and even touching on naturopathic medicines and vitamin supplements. It's kind of a wide ranging thing.
Yeah. So as you mentioned, this problem is huge, and it goes back, right? And I mentioned the government partnership, and this goes to the safety and efficacy thing. And it's not a whole lot different in other places. Maybe it's worse in the United States than it is in other places, but it goes on in other places. So here in the US, the FDA is paid, last year, I think they got $2 billion from drug and device makers in what they call user fees.
Mm.
Now, what do the user fees buy? This is to review your product, all right? And the review consists of, and this should scare everybody, the data that the drug company or the device maker chooses to submit. In other words, it's not raw data. And I've said for years, what needs to happen is that first of all, these studies shouldn't be conducted by the drug companies and device makers anyway. And then all of the data should be turned over, not just the cherry picked or summaries or whatever. And how we know this, by the way, is in lawsuits where people have sued who've been harmed by drugs or devices. Attorneys have gone to the FDA and said, we want the raw data. And they go, we don't have it. The drug companies didn't have to give it. So it won't shock you based on this for me to tell you that the approval rate for drugs and devices is about 96% in the United States. So when people started saying here, you saw this in the press, gosh, we hope the vaccine for COVID gets approved. We knew it was going to get approved. Everything gets approved. And I've kind of half joking said, I want to see the 4% they turned down. Must be like intravenous arsenic. And there's probably a conversation in the hallway saying, turn it in next year and we'll approve it. We just got to look like we're paying attention. Mm-hmm. So you have that problem. You can't have, we don't have regulators, we have partners. We have government partners to medicine. Now you combine that, there's another insidious thing that goes on too. And that's the lack of training of healthcare professionals, including medical doctors. They don't know how to practice informed decision-making, and they just go along. I mean, the opiate crisis in the United States, people like to blame it on the pill mills in West Virginia. Well, they contributed, but that's not the biggest part of what happened. What really happened was Purdue Pharma had highly skilled, well-trained, and incredibly attractive, I might add, sales reps who went out and told, with big budgets, who went out and told doctors that there was an epidemic of untreated pain in the United States and that OxyContin was not addictive. Mm-hmm. And 250,000 doctors in the United States said, okay, and they started prescribing, all right? So when you have a group of people who are that gullible, all right, willing to just go along with something like that, this is extremely problematic. Now, what does this have to do with our current situation? Well, if you can be sold that crock of crap, you can be sold almost anything, including this. And so I hear every day people saying, I just don't understand how these doctors are going along with this. Well, they are. And they're watching, and some of them, I think, do know what's going on, but they watch other people be punished for speaking out. And then they say, well, I can't let that happen to me, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think it's amazing. We have this like back and forth right now of, oh, there's these treatments that are available and this is really good and that's really good. But nobody takes it upon themselves, that personal accountability to look and see, well, let me go online, let me see what are the adverse effects. So
Right.
how's this going to affect me? Because, they could say 98% of people will be helped by this product. But what if you're that 2%?
Right. Well, and it's all about risk benefit ratio, and what is it worth to you? All right. So actually, almost everything we do in medicine, there is an application for it. The question is, are you the candidate? And the incentive is to make everybody a candidate because you make a lot more money that way, right? So the key is figuring out if you're the person who's going to benefit. So take statin drugs, for example. They are so overprescribed, and the average person gets less than a 1% reduction in their risk as a result of taking them. But about 3 or 4% of the population actually qualifies to take them and would benefit from taking them. So the key is figuring out if you're that group or not, in that group or not. And so again, I always use analogies. If we look at everything else, there's room for figuring out if this is the right thing for you. And I'll just give you a simple example. People walk into my house and I have a great big center hall. And once in a while, somebody will say, how do you justify having so much square footage tied up in a room you can't sit in? And I tell them the same thing. I always dreamed about buying a house that had a big center hall. I didn't have that when I was a kid, right? And I wanted that. I didn't have it in any of the early houses I owned. Okay, so my value system says I want a big center hall. Somebody else says this is ridiculous. Somebody else says, oh, these big trees, my God, you must rake leaves for the whole fall. I wouldn't live in a house like this. I like living in it looks like a city park in my house, right? So I like that. And I also like raking leaves. Good decision for me, bad decision for you. So there's the facts of the matter, and then there's the individual evaluation. And what you have to figure out is, does this thing, whatever it is, the drug, the test, the procedure, the vaccine, first of all, what are the clear risks and benefits based on factual information? And then how does that fit in with my own value system? Okay,
Mhm.
what I want for me. And it's a simple, it is very simple, but we've been taught that that's not the way you buy medicine. And that is the way you should buy everything, including medicine.
Mhm. I wonder if you could expand a little bit on naturopathic medicines and vitamin supplements because there's always, and I've seen this for such a long time. It's just set up as a comparison of this one's good, this one's bad, or there's all these negatives here, there's no negatives over here,
Right.
and but it's not really that black and white.
Well, it's not, but I think the first thing you have to look at is if the paradigm is wrong, taking a shift inside the same paradigm isn't going to make you much better off. So
Mhm.
let's look at the paradigm for traditional medicine. You give me a symptom and I'll give you a drug, okay, or a surgery or something, okay? Well, what's the big problem here is we're not treating cause, all right? And we have to start looking at cause. So if the oil light comes on in my car, I could just pull over to the side of the road, pop the hood and disconnect the fuse that lights up the oil lamp. Well, now I don't have to look at it. That's the symptom. But whatever the cause is sooner or later going to stop the car from operating. So I probably ought to take it to somebody to have a look, right? Okay. Same thing here. All right. So we need to treat cause, not symptom. So what happens in naturopathic, holistic, integrative, all that is you're in the same paradigm. Give me a symptom and I'm going to give you a supplement. All right. And the argument often is, well, this isn't as harmful as the drug that the doctor might recommend that you take instead. Well, a couple things I'll say about that. The first is the obvious, you're still treating a symptom. But the other thing is the objective of medicine is not to hurt people less. Think about this for a minute. I'm going to hurt, you should come to me because I'm going to hurt you less than the other people in practice. The objective of medicine should be to the extent possible to restore people to health and show them how to stay healthy. And so if you're taking glucosamine for arthritis pain instead of a COX-2 inhibitor, it's clearly less dangerous than the COX-2 inhibitor. But whatever's causing the pain has not been addressed. So sooner or later, something else is going to happen, and then something else and something else. So this lateral, this moving across the plane to inside the same system is not what you want to get into. And I think the added thing, and I am a naturopath. I don't use those initials anymore. I just don't want any part of it. And the reason is because in the alternative health professions, the the discipline to use factual information is even more lacking than it is in traditional health. Okay. And I take a lot of heat. I guess I'm used to taking a lot of heat. Maybe that was the boot camp training for being the captain of the ship in the pandemic response legally here in the United States. But I take a lot of heat because people think that I should have used my public platform to promote their cause. But my cause is getting to the truth about things so that people can make good decisions. And then you just, the chips fall wherever they may. All
Mhm.
right. And I'm not here to protect a group of people or a practice group. I'm here to advocate for consumer health, truthfulness, informed decision making, and all that. And the reason I've been successful internationally for this is because I have taken that principled stand to say, listen, I am not going to worry about who I alienate in doing this. Because in the interest of getting to the bottom line about these things, it's just going to happen the way it happens. So I've had a lot of people angry with me over the years, including even some in the plant-based community. And I'm just I'm willing to let that happen if it's required, because I think we have to stop being ideologues and we have to start acting like scientists.
Right. One of the things I found really interesting was somebody you mentioned in your course on understanding the history of psychiatry or understanding psychiatry, Thomas Saz. And somebody asked him a question at a presentation he gave, and he talks about basically how there is never no risk and
Right,
that you can't protect people from taking their own risks, from making their own choices.
exactly.
So one of the things that seemed to pop up for me that was really relevant was how even the research articles in the medical journals seem to be problematic. Like what is published and how you sort through that information, and it's very time consuming. And I know you spend a lot of time doing that.
Mhm.
Um, But, maybe when people decide, well, I'm not going to spend all that time doing that, maybe a baseline would be, well, if you decide to take a product, just know if you don't know everything about it, there's some risk involved and you'll deal with it the way you want to deal with it. But maybe just like having that in the back of your mind.
Right. Well, I think that the first thing is when people say, "Well, I don't want to deal with all of that," well, then you're going to get what you deserve.
Mm,
All right. So if I'm going to buy a house without checking into anything, I don't know what the taxes are. I don't know what needs to be repaired. I don't know what the houses on the street sell for. I'm pretty much likely to get what I deserve, which is maybe overpaying for a house that starts falling down when I move into it. All right. So, and again, people see that type of thing very clearly when it comes to other things in their life, and then they somehow think healthcare is exempt from that. Um, I'm lucky because the type of people who come here are people who want to do this. They want to understand more about what's going on. They want to make better decisions. I think a lot of people don't they don't call us because they don't know they should. In other words, they're still operating under a couple of myths. One of which is that I can trust medicine, and it's too complicated for me to look into myself. And so that's just a matter of education. We're spreading the word over time that you need to be informed. But back to Tom Saj, and our attorney uses this all the time in this COVID situation, talking about there is no such thing as no risk, but we allow people to decide what they're going to do. Okay. And so people like to skydive. All right. I don't want to do that. They say, oh, it's fun. I don't think it's fun.
mm,
Okay. I'd be scared half to death. I don't want to do that. Now, when I was in South Africa, my colleague and I petted cheetahs one afternoon. And people say to me that you could not pay me enough money to go in a cage with cheetahs who have teeth the size of your hand and hang out with them for a bit. Well, I signed a paper saying I want to take that risk. I didn't want the government saying, Pam, you are not allowed to pet cheetahs because it's dangerous. I knew it was dangerous. Okay. We went into African plains at night. I was as close as this water bottle to elephants, and I mean these animals, they could just walk on you and you're gone, right?
mhm,
I agreed to do that. I wanted to do that. All right. I went running, and one of the biggest risks and where I was in Africa is baboons like to attack women when they run. So you have somebody in a golf cart that minimizes the risk a little bit. I agreed to do that. So everybody, when it comes to risk, and I think that's the whole thing that we're talking about with this COVID thing, there is no such thing as no risk. You can't eliminate the risk, and you're not going to eliminate the spread of any virus. That's never been done in the history. So people are buying a false story that we're trying to minimize the risk. We're increasing the risk of other bad things happening, and we need to let people decide what they want to do. If you want to stay home and wear a mask in your own home, we live in the People's Republic of America, but you can still do that. And if I choose to go out without a mask and get sick, that's my choice to do it.
yeah. Yeah. And I think another person that I came across, H.G. Welch, when he wrote Less Medicine, More Health,
Mm-hmm.
he addresses that myth that, well, what's the point in living? Is it all geared towards not making you sick and not dying? Taking away all of the things people enjoy doing. So he
Yeah,
mentions, you're driving. Um, Most people don't drive exactly at the speed limit, but they willingly, take that risk. It's like,
right,
well, if you want to, you can, you get into a car, there's a chance you could get into an accident and you
right.
could decide to walk everywhere. But even then, there's cars going around, so you might get hit by a car. You never know.
Right.
Um,
So the
yeah.
way most people live their lives, and this is again everything that's going on today is just contrary to what we know is common sense. The way most people live their lives is they do their best to minimize risk. Okay, so I know that I can get in an accident driving in a car. Sometimes doing everything right, getting hit by the proverbial bus, right? But I have insurance. I fasten my seatbelt. I try to drive the speed limit. I pay attention to, kids in my neighborhood. There's a fair chance a kid can come running out in the street or an animal. So you drive real slow, and you don't drink and drive. And I mean, you do all that, but then you realize that something bad could still happen, right? And so every year it's flu season, and you could get the flu. Well, every year we don't stop living because of that. We realize that that's a risk. And by the way, I wrote an article, I forget which article when, because it all runs together. When you stop sleeping and all the days just run together, you don't even know what day it is every day. It's kind of an interesting way to live. I'm not entirely unhappy about it at this point, to tell you the truth. But one of the articles I wrote about asymptomatic spread, okay, and why we need to stop all this nonsense is that here in this office, we have a lot of people who work here, all right? And this summer, or this past year rather, in January of 2020, we had 2 people who got the flu, all right? And I want to talk about this because I think everybody knows this is the case, but people who have the flu do not want to stay at work, all right? If they start feeling sick in the middle of the day, they can't wait to get the heck out of here, all right? So this idea that sick people are, staying around to infect everybody, they want to go home, and they usually don't want to come back home till they stop, or come back to work till they stop vomiting and the whole 9 yards. So not at the same time, but 2 people got the flu, and we're out for a couple of days each. Our people are pretty healthy here, so they don't get knocked down for very long. Where the rest of us all going around, oh my God, 2 people at Wellness Farm got the flu. We better close the doors, get out the Clorox and sanitize everything, stop teaching yoga classes. And no, I mean, we keep everything clean around here. Healthy people get exposed. They mount an antibody response, don't even know about it, and life goes on. And so inciting panic in people, drumming up risk and scaring people when there is nothing to be afraid of is just ludicrous. And the idea that people are so careless that they have to be reined in. I mean, I have never been to a grocery store, just to the point, been to a grocery store, and I picked that deliberately because we're buying our food there, where I've seen somebody vomiting on the bananas. I mean, those people are staying home. They're not vomiting on the bananas, and then you're stuck having to pick up bananas with vomit, right? Okay. So this is just an insane way to act. We're all afraid of a virus. What if we get it? Oh my gosh, in the grocery store stand. And what's happened is as time has gone on, I'm sure it's going on in Canada too, there's an increasingly just ignoring all of it to a certain extent. And nothing really is happening as a consequence, except the government's getting frustrated and trying to take more draconian actions to try and rein it all in. But people are just worn out from this crap, and they're starting to realize it's crap.
Yeah.
We have a curfew in Ohio at 10 o'clock. So the restaurants have to close. It's putting the restaurants out of business, but nobody observes it. I was out after curfew a couple of weeks ago, coming home from an illegal conference that we weren't supposed to have 150 people in the room, the whole 9 yards. I didn't promote it. I was just there. But anyway, it was 11 o'clock at night. You would never know there's a curfew. It looks just like it did, the year before, right? So
yeah,
there's a fatigue about it all as people just recognize you can't eliminate all risk. Life is not worth living if the sole purpose of it is to eliminate risk, for most people anyway. And if you do want to live that way, it makes you fairly bizarre, go do it, but don't bother me with it, right?
And I think the other part about the medical mill that is often talked about, where you get sucked into the medical system, it's very disempowering. And I want to talk about, with solutions and informed healthcare, how the information that you give is empowering to people. It reminds them of their own capabilities for being healthy, and it's not complicated. So maybe we could start on the principles that Wellness Forum Health follows and why there's such a focus on food as medicine.
Right. So the first thing is, and you bring up this business of hanging out with doctors. All right. So a really wonderful thing happened in 2020, and that is that the medical system sort of collapsed. It closed for a while in many places. So people got out of the habit of hanging out with doctors, right? Because how you get into the medical mill, which is what you brought up, is you start taking a healthy body to regular visits with a physician. And these words are never spoken, but this is essentially the proposition. I'm fine, there's nothing wrong with me. See if you can examine me and find something wrong, and then I'll pay to take care of it. Now, again, using an analogy, what if I did that at my house? I mean, my house is 30 years old and I've tried to maintain it. It was a big investment for me. But what if I said, I'm going to have every contractor I can find come over tomorrow, and we're going to go through every square foot of this very big place, and the wooded lot, the big deck and the attached garage and all that, and find something wrong, and my insurance company will pay you to fix it. I'd be under construction for the rest of my life, right? So we got to get away from this idea that hanging around with doctors when you're healthy is a good idea, all right? There's a family practice doctor here in Central Ohio who very conservative about, respecting parents' rights and all this kind of thing. And one of our folks took her infant to this doctor. I think we need to get rid of pediatricians. I think that overall they're pretty dangerous at these days. But anyway, so she hands the baby to the doctor, and the doctor says, "What's the matter with the baby?" She says, "Nothing. Baby's fine." He hands the baby back. He goes, "Well, then there's nothing for me to do, is there?" All right. And that's the way it should be, right? So first of all, we've got to stop hanging around with doctors, but we're dealing with people who did, all right? And so what happens is you get diagnosed with something. And many times it isn't even a real thing. Like there is no such thing as prediabetes. There's no such thing as prehypertension. There's no such thing as pre-osteoporosis. This is all disease mongering to sell drugs. So you get diagnosed with something and you get drugged, and some people take the drugs. Drugs have side effects. If there actually is something going on, again, we're treating the symptom, not the cause. So the cause continues. So however it happens, you end up seeing another specialist, probably taking some more drugs. And when people come in here, they're often seeing 6 doctors and taking 9 drugs. And then they try to naturopath and they've got 2 pages of supplements, and they're worse off now than they were before they started the whole thing. So pulling people out of the medical mill involves saying, okay, let's take a look at everything you've done. And some of it you can't do anything about. So if you had your gallbladder taken out, it's not like we can put it back in. But we might learn the lesson that that was an unnecessary surgery. So you're going to be really suspicious the next time somebody tells you to take out a body part. If you were given a medication that you shouldn't have taken, well, you can withdraw from it. And we teach people how to go back to their doctors and talk about that, or swap it out for a safer drug, right? If you're taking a supplement that's useless, you can stop taking it. If you actually have problems and they're caused by being overweight, bad eating, not exercising, not being hydrated, you can fix all that, all right? And then what you do, you can't fix everything, and not everything can be dealt with, but what you do is you restore health to the extent that you can, then you keep that person from falling into the same trap again. And so, and again, if it's not an emergency, there's no reason to start it right now. And even cancer patients, I tell every cancer patient, stop for a month and figure out what you're going to do. Let the emotional charge settle down, okay? Investigate, and then go back to your doctors. You may have a few more doctors involved or treatments involved, and say, "This, I've decided, here's what I'm going to do. Here's my plan. Here's how you fit into my plan." And you drive the process, right? Instead of just doing whatever and then figuring out it doesn't work and saying, "Oh, now what the heck do I do?" Right?
Mhm. Yeah, and one of the things I like that you state often is that you're not in the convincing business.
Right. Right. And a lot of people in the diet and lifestyle business, first of all, they're teaching ideology, not science.
Mhm.
Okay. This company is not called "I want to be like Pam." All right. As it turns out, nobody wants to be like Pam. All right. Particularly right now. But the point is that, I hear people say, "Well, what I do for breakfast is this, and what I do for lunch is that. And I always make sure I put this and that." Well, maybe you don't like this and that, and you don't like what I eat for breakfast. All right. I run, well, maybe you hate running. All right. So the key is, first of all, putting information in front of people and having the respect for them to let them choose their own path. I think that's one of the things that's infuriating people right now is we're all being treated like children. You're too stupid to make your own decisions. Again, it's just a bigger expression of what's always gone on. So, so somebody will say, for example, coming in here, "Well, I don't know if I'm ready to do this or do that or give up this." I said, "I don't know what you're ready to do, but the place to start is just get information, then you decide what to do. And our job is to help you do that, whatever it is, right?" So I think we need to we show respect for people and show them science, teach them how to look at the science, and let them choose what they want to do. And I think that people are much more likely to respond and long-term stick with things if they feel that some ownership of the decision-making process. And I don't want to be in the convincing business. And when I train health professionals, I tell them, if you're helping other people with their health and you're trying to talk them into doing something, stop that. It's disrespectful. Okay.
Mhm.
It's very disrespectful. And I also feel very strongly about, while we're on the subject of habit change and that kind of thing, that and ideology, differentiating ideology from science, is that a less than perfect plan executed over a long period of time is much better than a perfect plan that lasts for a few weeks and then people fall off. So our people, most of them do not eat a vegan diet. That shocks some people. A lot of our people drink coffee and they continue to enjoy a glass of wine from time to time. And you can gasp out loud now when I tell you this. They have cake on their birthday and they somehow survive to tell about it, right? And some of them are not real aggressive about exercise. They go to yoga and work out in the gym a couple times and walk on a treadmill, but they don't want to run a marathon like me, right? And so uh, that practiced over a long period of time is a whole lot better than these bursts of perfection followed by falling out of the deal.
Mhm.
So it's a much more measured approach. It's a lot less. I heard somebody give a lecture. It made me cringe one time. When you start, when you start down this path, it's all out massive action. I want to back off of that frantic, clean everything out of the house and, let's all eat kale. And, just, it doesn't
Mhm.
last. All right.
Yeah.
It
I
doesn't.
think that's like it's it's a different it's not really a health point of view because for the individual to do that, they're deciding all of a sudden to repress all these other parts of themselves that they're calling bad. And
Mhm,
so they're not listening to them and figuring out why they're there in the first place. And they're not helping themselves. They're
mhm.
forcing themselves to go in one direction when maybe, when you go more slowly or moderately, you listen to your own body's feedback and see, well, maybe I shouldn't be exercising today because I need my body to rest, kind of.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Well, there's another aspect of it too, and that is that people have to enjoy this. All right. And what I mean by that, they have to like the food that they're eating. They have to like the exercise that they're engaging in. Now, let's get past the obvious. If somebody says, "Well, I like Oreos and cheeseburgers," okay, well, if you want to get well, we understand we can't do that. But here's my point. If somebody says, I don't want to have smoothies for breakfast because I like to have a warm breakfast, then you should have a warm breakfast. It doesn't matter what I do. Okay. If somebody says, I don't ever want to run, then don't do it because there's a lot of other ways to get aerobic exercise. If somebody says, I don't like tofu, don't eat it. I hate kale, eat other leafy greens, right? So I think that we miss the quality of life issue. This is often comes off as a thing. If you were a smart person, you'd do what I tell you to do, and you'd understand that it's good for you. And if you veer from it for any reason, you must have some kind of moral failing. And I hear another conversation I hear that makes me cringe is when people start this whole business of these people are just junkies, they're food addicts. You let them have a cookie, they'll just turn into degenerates. Well, that's again terribly disrespectful. And I think part of our goal here is to help people eat normally. All right. And when I say normally, I don't mean the standard American diet. I mean the ability to go out to dinner with friends when we get to do that again, to go to a birthday party, to enjoy treats and special things. Okay. I mean, I had some good friends over for dinner last week and we had wine. I lived to be here to tell the story, right? It didn't seem like it killed me in my own dining room. But the life is not food is not calories and nutrients on a plate. It has social significance. It's designed to be enjoyed. The first social experience humans had was sharing food. And so we just can't, when you're talking about drugs, it really is hard science, a procedure, a diagnostic test. Now we're looking at hard science with your own personal evaluation involved in it. But when it comes to food, we spend a lot of time eating. It occupies a lot of our time. And so it just isn't an option to start being a dictator about the way things are when you sign up here. You know, um, you have to make it the way things are that they're comfortable with themselves.
Mhm. And I think what's interesting is I've been looking into, human rights and looking at human rights declarations and the Constitution and patient rights and one of the quotes, I can't place it right now, but it always starts with what happens on the micro level. So what are you doing in your house? How are you treating yourself? And if you're
Mhm.
treating yourself like in this dictatorial, authoritative way where you're saying, no, this part of you is bad, you should do this. And then we see that now reflected, like we expect our doctors to tell us what to do.
Mhm.
And where it's almost like the way in religion the priest would be when you are a sinner And so you're born in sin, you're obviously not good, so you have to redeem yourself.
Right.
And it's that whole thing of you're not good enough, that's just in your nature. But we could flip that and say, well, you are good enough. And if you start using that angle, it may actually be more helpful towards you
Right.
changing the way you want to.
Right. Right. And you have to meet people where they are.
Hmm.
And I think one of the reasons we've been successful in training health professionals is because we have had the experience of dealing people in a different sort of way. Here's what I mean by this. We're a membership organization and people remain members here. Some people have been members since the beginning. So we have contact with them on an ongoing basis. And one of the things that we've learned is that it's quite easy for most people to understand the academic part of something, but the actual execution of a plan is much more complicated. And it's anything from I'm afraid to talk to a doctor or question a doctor. And that's valid. We have to talk about that. We got to get you ready to do it if you want to have health, but we can't ignore the fact that that might be intimidating. To I live with people who don't want to eat the way that I do. My kids are always pulling something at the last minute, and then I don't get to go to the gym or whatever it is. We have got to work with people to help them sort out how to do this beyond just saying eat plants and do what I say. And if you were serious about your health, get on board and you do all this stuff. I mean, there's just an awful lot of lack of compassion, I think, for the struggles that people have. And first of all, just even grasping this whole thing, because I'll share this with you. I come from an interesting family, and I've been talking more about this kind of thing on YouTube lately. Very uncomfortable for me, by the way, to talk about myself. I'd rather talk about science. But I come from a family where there were a lot of problems. Okay, a lot of good things. I learned a good work ethic and all that kind of stuff, but a lot of problems too. But focusing on the good things, I have to say that all of the good things I learned from my family, mostly my parents and grandparents, finish what you start, do unto others, responsibility for being successful at things. If a job's worth doing, it's worth doing right. Believing in yourself, taking principled stands. I mean, those kinds of things. I think I followed through and did pretty well with those things. There's a saying, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, right? But you know something? I don't remember 22 seconds worth of conversation about health when I was a kid. Nobody talked about what you're supposed to eat or exercise or how to take care of yourself. That just wasn't part of it. So it's not shocking that I was 38 years old before I ever thought about what I was putting in my mouth or whatever. Well, that's where most people are. I don't think my story is unusual. I think that's most people. So I think the first thing is we have to have a lot of patience and compassion for people who are for the first time waking up and saying, I have to make room in my life and in my busy day for an activity that I didn't know until 20 minutes ago I was supposed to do. Okay, that's a big shift, right? And if we recognize it as a big shift, then we'll have more patience for people. And that's what we need, because we should be the opposite of what they experience in healthcare. And I think I'll just share this with you, I think one of the most telling things that people say to me that tells us what their relationship is with other people in healthcare is when they come in here and say, you're going to be really mad at me. I say, well, why would you say that? Well, I know when I talked to you 3 weeks ago, I said I was going to get myself to the gym and clean out my house, and I haven't done any of it. And I say, oh, thank God. And they go, what? Well, I thought, I mean, if you slash my tires or you hurt my cat, I would be mad at you. So I was, or my mind was going, you're talking about you didn't go to the gym and you haven't cleaned out your pantry yet? Oh, thank God, it's only that. And you can just see, it's like, and can you imagine going through life thinking that if you don't do what somebody else thought that you should do, that they're going to be mad at you, right? I want to be the opposite of that. All right. I'm not a taskmaster. It's not my job to beat the crap out of you till you do what I say. It's my job to help you do what you want to do in the way that you want to do it, helping to guide you to look at what is what your expected outcome is, and what that really means translated into action. So anyway, we have a lot of work to do to make healthcare friendly again. Let's make America, we're making Americans free again. Let's make healthcare nice again. How about that for an objective?
Yeah, absolutely. And before we end off, I wonder if you could touch on, so this food as medicine. One of the things that I found really interesting about this is that it's super affordable. People can use
Yeah.
it anywhere, whatever circumstances they have. So I wonder if you could talk about your experience helping people. I think they were on welfare or stamps program,
Yeah.
and you actually helped them to get off of some of their medications so they wouldn't have that added expense, and they could use that limited money they had to actually feed themselves well.
Yeah. And by the way, it doesn't just look limited to people on welfare. A lot of people are living on budgets right now.
Yeah.
And one of my assignments in one of the classes I teach every year is to the students have to come up with a meal plan for a family of four for 5 days using government assistance. And they're all really successful at it. You do a little more food prep than I do or you do, but you can do it. So as it turns out, potatoes and rice and vegetables and things like that are a whole lot cheaper than pork chops and soft drinks and a lot of the stuff that people buy. They've just never been taught. And so you can live within your means. I mean, I'm all for people who really need it, I'm all for expanding the budget. But until that time, we can teach them to live within the budget so that they can be healthy and thrive and be well fed. So if you look at the menu plans that our students come up with, it doesn't look very far off of what I eat on a regular basis. I just have the advantage to order food in once in a while and think if you're on government assistance, you're not going to be able to do that. But from a what the foods look like choices, I eat a lot of potatoes. I eat a lot of soup. I eat a lot of salads. I eat a lot of wraps and beans and rice dishes, and that's all cheap stuff, right? It's all inexpensive stuff.
Yeah,
So
yeah, and one of the things I have here, like we're in Newfoundland, and I loved using the traditional Newfoundland vegetables. So we're like in a cold climate, but the vegetables that people grew up with subsistence farming, you've got rutabaga, potato, carrots, turnip, parsnip, and cabbage, and
great.
you're not really going to be deficient when you
No,
have that stuff. Yeah.
not at all. And if the food's prepared right,
Hmm.
people love it,
Yeah. Yeah.
if it's done right. And if they like the foods, like if somebody said, I don't want to eat rutabaga, well, then don't. You can eat potatoes
That's
and
right.
other things
Yeah.
instead. So I think it's going back to that, helping people figure out a path that's right for them.
Hmm. So, to finish off, I wonder if you were talking about how the problem most people have is with the implementation of making a change. And with what's going on right now with the cancellations of surgeries and the just healthcare kind of, I guess, running amok, really. If you want to get out of the healthcare, if you want to start taking care of your own health, what would be a good first step for people to do?
Well, I think, getting with somebody like you or my company who can help you do it. I think it's hard to do by yourself. Okay. um, Taking classes to learn how to become more self-sufficient at it. But
Hmm.
you have to get some information. In other words, I'm going to go back to my example. I need to buy a house. I don't know how to do it. I don't know where to live. Well, you got to start by gathering information. So you start by looking at what are the things I want to accomplish, and then how do I. Okay, I don't have kids in school, so I have a lot more flexibility on where to live. That would be one example. How important are schools? So I think you have to get with somebody who can help you navigate this. But the healthcare system being as dysfunctional as it is right now is a good time, I think, to sit down and say, what am I doing that's necessary, unnecessary, and how do I want to interact with healthcare in the future? We're all going to have to do it sooner or later. We have parents and family members, all that kind of stuff. You can't avoid it entirely, but you can set the terms a little bit differently for sure.
Hmm. And one last thing for the medical professionals who are speaking out. There are some who have been speaking out and they've faced repercussions, or they're deciding they don't want to be in the medical system anymore. Could you mention a little bit about what you teach at Informed Healthcare and what options they could find there?
You mean for practitioners or
Yes.
yeah, for practitioners, what we can teach you to do, I think a lot of people right now are disgusted with healthcare. It was not fun before this. It's intolerable now. And so they're looking at what can I do to use my skills? I don't want to work in the hospital. I mean, people don't want to get the vaccine. They're basically saying it's the deal breaker for me. If they're going to make me do it, I'm leaving. So what we can teach people how to do is to set up your own practice. And within the scope of practice of whatever, you have a lot more latitude as a medical doctor than you do as a health consultant or a nutritionist or whatever. But you can set yourself up in an independent practice. And again, the practice, if you want to call it that, is informed decision making. It's helping people to look at information to make up their own decisions. It's not issuing instructions, which keeps you out of this practice issue. In other words, we're information providers. All right. What you do with it is up to you. All right. So let's again look at the realtor. If I'm actually handling the entire transaction for buying a house, I'm in the real estate business, I need a license. If somebody comes to me and says, what are the things I should be thinking about when I buy a house? I say schools. Let me show you how to look at school systems here. What the things you should be looking for. Let's talk about property taxes. Here's how you go find property tax. This is stuff people already know, but they don't know how to do it in healthcare. All right. This is how you find out about, repairs. Here's how you price out basement waterproofing and all that kind of stuff. Well, what we're doing is the equivalent of that for healthcare, and then people are making their own decisions about it. All right. So anyway, it's becoming more and more attractive for people to escape that system, the medical system, and want to do something on their own. And I think that's going to be real positive, because I've said for years, one of the problems is the hospitals and the medical institutions have just swept up all the practitioners into these huge practices. It's turned them into medical robots. They don't do what they think is right anymore. They do what the institutions dictate. And we need to go back to family practice. When I was a kid, our doctor, I remember him. He took care of my grandparents and my mother and father, my sister and I, and my cousins, my aunt and uncle. He was a family doctor. He knew our family. And my mother didn't take us running into the doctor when we were healthy. And she sure as heck didn't call him every time we had a sniffle. All right. So getting these people back into independent practice, getting into that network of practitioners now that can be trusted family associates, I think that's going to be a good byproduct of all of this.
Great. And so what I'm going to do is to give some links to your website. And you have also, aside from your business and Make Americans Free Again, the Wellness Forum Institute.
Right.
And there's some courses there as well that people can take, diet and lifestyle. There's a great nutrition course. And is there any last things you want to say about your efforts for what's going on right now?
Well, we're fighting an uphill battle, but we're going to win it. We know we're going to win it because we have the data on our side. So if you want information about any of this, pampopper@msn.com. I put out a free newsletter, free videos every week. All that's free. Send me an email if you'd like to be added to the list, and you can start becoming informed that way and try us out. It's a good way to see what we do.
And that shirt you're wearing too. That's
Make Americans Free Again. Yeah, getting dressed is easy these days. I wear one of these and yoga pants. That's like my uniform. Wear it every day.
Yeah, and anybody can get that. You've got some apparel and
Make Americans Free Again. I've got my Make Americans Free cup, and we've got all kinds of stuff on the website you can get.
And that funding goes towards the lawsuits. Is that right?
Right.
Yep.
Exactly.
Awesome. Okay. Thank you so much, Pam, for coming on.
Thanks for having me. It's always a pleasure to talk to you.
Yeah.
Take care.
Take care.